Hello, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural episode for Saint Matthias Anglican Church's podcast. I'm Father Aaron Ott, the host. And while our church may be located in Dothan, Alabama, we hope to touch on topics that are universal and would apply anywhere you might hear this. The purpose of these episodes is to facilitate organic conversations that can occur between people, or even within your own conscience at times, between the perspective of faith and the subjects or people you might encounter outside the church walls. For this reason, we had considered different titles for the podcast, like Rabbit Trails for going down unexpected pathways, or Off Limits, because perhaps the topics aren't what you'd expect to hear in a church conversation. Some clever, more punchy title might come later, but for now we just want to model good dialogue by talking with people of our community and possibly establishing some friendships along the way. For instance, this first conversation is with my friend Tyler Jarvis, who I met while dining out at a local craft brewery. Our conversation started down many different pathways, and we knew that some of that dialogue would be profitable for you too. So join us on our journey. Welcome to Conversations at Saint Matthias Anglican Church. We want to open up a dialogue to be able to have conversations about various different topics that could be specific to the wiregrass here in southeast Alabama, but also universal as well, that could be applicable to anyone who's listening well outside of our area or watching on our YouTube channel. But today we have as my guest my friend Ty, and Ty, unfortunately, I'm gonna let you pronounce your last name because even you had to spell it out for me the other day.
Yeah, it's Ty Jarvis.
Okay, but now we started a conversation. We met at a local craft brewery, and our conversations we've had a great time, especially with everyone that not just our conversations, but everyone else I've met as well. But when we first met, we were there with a group of friends, and because you're in Dothan attending what school?
Yeah, I'm attending the Alabama College of Osteopathic Medicine. Okay. I just finished my first year, so I am now officially an OMS 2. Okay. Studying to practice medicine as a doctor.
Okay, wonderful. And you told me that you were talking about recently you come across a book, The Body Keeps a Score.
Yeah.
Right? And that started us on something of a rabbit trail regarding, rabbit trails are good, started us on a rabbit trail regarding mental health, generational trauma sometimes. Mm-hmm. There's actually language of that comes out of the Old Testament with regard to generational curses we don't like to put it that way. We don't like to talk about generational curses because we're so highly individualized in the West. But the idea of something being passed down, and we only have two categories really, is blessings and cursings. And so if some person's sin 2 or 3 generations ago hasn't been addressed and been, dealt with, it can just keep passed on. And so,
what's interesting from maybe a medical standpoint there is. Previously, in medicine, we can go back wicked far, and we can talk about, the humors, the humoral idea of medicine, where, your phlegm humor is too high, or your blood humor is too high, and okay, so you either do an effleurage to try to get rid of the phlegm, or you bleed them. And we've come, I would say, a long way from that. I can only think of one area where we still use medicinal phlebotomy in order to bloodlet, and it's in a iron, you have too much iron, so it becomes toxic in the body. But anyways, what intrigues me is the idea of this genetic component, and we always have this conversation in inter-level psych classes or even in your psych rotations of what is nature and what is nurture. Right. And I think that's the terminology that's most used in the secular world, is this kind of nature versus nurture for the same concept of generational curses. Right. Whether that be alcoholism, whether that be a medical condition itself, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Well, and it is a thing where, something can get passed on. They can be passed on even physically and genetically. I argue that this I don't want to get too far afield. We said we were going to be open to rabbit trails in the conversation. It's non-scripted and it's blessed spontaneity.
Mm-hmm.
But I have often made
we're both overly caffeinated.
Right. Well, in a psychosomatic way, I'm somehow persuaded myself that tea is less.
Oh, sure.
Right. It's probably not the same amount. It's probably same amount of caffeine.
There's less, but not by much.
I don't know. I just don't get as jittery if I'm drinking tea during the day as much like coffee after coffee. I know what the deal is. But I've made the case before, and I use this specifically when I'm talking to firefighters, is I will differentiate material and immaterial DNA. Because material DNA, that's something that can be described and described and defined and studied in ways that that I'm amazingly unqualified to talk about.
That's the stuff we sequence.
Right.
Yeah.
But immaterial DNA, that's influence. That is things that have to do with the memory and soul and the immaterial aspects of us that are passed downable in many ways, that are oftentimes not physically traceable.
Would you say like personality in a way is kind of
something about personality? But
maybe
personality,
not all of it, but.
And we can have another conversation about personality because we've talked about nature and nurture, and I always feel like that's kind of like a dichotomy, and it's really missing a third component because our conversation about nature and nurture is still highly deterministic.
Or if it were like a slider thing rather than just one or the other.
I think nature, nurture, and choice. I think choice has to go into that. Sure. Has to be a very important X factor because. That's how we account for two people in the same environment making such different choices. Mm-hmm. And so, and the large corpus of the scriptures of the Bible is all about, okay, this is your situation, this is your standing, this is where you've been, but here's your choice ahead of you anyway. And it seems to ignore the fact that the passive voice of the Bible seems to ignore the idea that we might have a chemical predisposition for a thing, nature. We might have had a specific set of circumstances that we were raised in, nurture. Seems to ignore all that and place choices before you nonetheless.
So how would you respond to that? And I think this still applies to the conversation we're having, but how would you respond to, I think it's a Calvinist that would be more...
Right.
How would you respond to someone from that tradition?
Right, and theologians in Europe attempted to kind of wrestle with how much of God's will working out in your life is your choice versus Him, what He is divinely ordained to do in advance. John Calvin, from his Institutes, has this idea of divine, will working its way out because you, out of a desire to protect the sovereignty of God, as though it needs protection, but out of a desire to protect the sovereignty of God, you don't want to ascribe to humankind too much free will, because that means that He might want to save somebody and they say no. Well, is that somehow neuter the Lord, that He could want to save someone and they just say nope? So the idea, the Arminian, or Arminius is another competing theologian that put so much emphasis on free will that the classic debate became between this dichotomy of Arminianism, humans have so much free will that they can actually resist the grace of God if indeed He's if He wants to bring someone to repentance and to salvation. The Calvinist point of view was the opposite extreme, and oftentimes you don't know to what extent do you think this, or are you reacting to the other side. But the Calvinistic point of view was to assert, no, this has to do with irresistible grace and the elect,
tulips and all that.
Exactly right. And the typically the Anglican perspective is to look at them both and go, y'all are suffering under the folly of overdefinition.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
In like manner that we declare other mysteries that like for example, how is Christ present in the sacraments? I don't know, and neither do you. I mean, right? I mean, there's not a punt to mystery. There's a positive affirmation of mystery that tries to, from the get-go, declare the dangers of hubris in figuring out the enigmatic.
Okay.
And so that's the Anglican perspective is going, no, y'all are extremes on this one. So like, for example, say the Roman Catholics would take transubstantiation with regard to, you've heard of this term before.
Where the bodies and the blood are physically Christ himself.
Right. Because transubstantiation, what is trans? It's supplanted, right?
Sure.
Where they would say that mystically the bread and wine has been supplanted with the body and blood, the physical body and blood of Jesus. Whereas the other side of that, the far extreme end of that argument was the school of thought that came out of the Swiss Ulrich Zwingli and the Swiss theologians that thought, no, it's none of that. You're being superstitious and weird. It's just bread and wine, and this is just to memorialize the fact that Jesus, died on the cross for you.
Sure.
And you're remembering what he said about in the Last Supper. So memorialism and transubstantiation became these two opposites of this spectrum.
Okay.
And again, many Anglican theologians went, you guys, really? You keep trying to over-define mysteries. And the problem is that, I oftentimes say that proto-heresy is born of a discontent with mystery.
Ooh.
Ooh,
I like that.
There's danger in trying to figure out what you should not.
Yeah.
And back to the Armenian Calvinist debate is how much of that is deterministic, God's ordained it already, and how much of that is absolutely your free will for you to choose. And the problem is that the scriptures seem to have plenty of verses offering both sides to you and doesn't seem to solve the problem.
So you present this idea. Can you say your thing again about proto-heresy and mystery? Because I want to speak to that, but I want it to click for me.
Okay. So proto-heresy, we know that throughout the church history there are times in which there is a mainstream Christian view, and then someone decides that the mainstream Christian view doesn't make sense to them, so they want to try to explain it more. Mm-hmm. And it produces the attempt to explain that winds up taking them afield to the point where the rest of the Christian church says, now you are so far off the beaten path now, you have to either come back or we're cutting you off. So that's why the idea of someone being a heretic, what is that? A heretic is someone where you go, okay, the boundaries of Christian thought have really been determined by how as the church, specifically in the first 1,000 years, really kind of decided what these boundaries are, because through a process of what's called negative theology. Negative theology is we can't tell you everything every way this is true,
but we know it's not this.
But we know it's out of bounds.
Okay.
So, I can't tell you all of the grains of the road you're on, but I can tell you when you're off the road.
Sure.
Typically, you run afoul of some clear Bible teaching about it, and so that's where the bounds get set up.
So you're not necessarily saying it is wrong to try to solve, or not solve, but it's wrong to dive into these mysteries and to try to understand them to the best of human ability. But ultimately, because they are divine mysteries, there will be a point where you cannot describe them any further. Right.
You're going to hit that glass ceiling of human understanding.
Sure.
I mean, anything you can understand, you can master, and so because if you fully understand a thing, then you know its secrets, then you can master it, and so there are things that the Scriptures hands us and says, okay, hold this in tension, but I'm not going to solve the problem for you.
So something that I've run into in just previous experiences with churches and individuals is the concept of fideism, whereas you believe in something for the sake of believing in it, and for the sake of you don't necessarily have to have in its purest form. You have no reason to believe it over anything else, but you have chosen to believe that thing.
Right.
And in its less pure, more realistic form, it's I don't necessarily know why I believe this, but this is what I've been told, or this is what I've grown up with, so this is what I'm going to believe. And I ran into this problem with actually a youth pastor friend of mine, who we were discussing. I don't even remember the topic to believe it or not, but we were on a golf course and we were talking about it, and I said, my friend's name, you're kind of getting on this line of fideism, and we get into this conversation of what is fideism, and I'm using all these big words, but he says, oh, okay, so how would you respond to, I almost wonder if at what point is being okay with the divine mystery fideistic, and at what point is it proper? Or are those things mutually exclusive?
Well, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I just recently had to write your autobiography in 2 pages.
Oh, good.
And so I had to send this off to a school that's considering me to, as part of their adjunct faculty.
Sure.
My old Bible college that I went to.
Fun.
Yeah. My father, it's a privilege for me to think that I might contribute to the things that they teach. But anyway, I had to kind of write
California?
Yes.
Okay.
I've taught online classes that may happen there too. I don't know.
Sweet.
But the point is that they said, please submit a 2-page autobiography. I'm like, okay, this is a fun exercise in brevity. But I could not include a sentence when it comes to that moment where they ask about your testimony and how you came to Christ, how you accepted Jesus. And I literally said, okay, so at age 6 at Vacation Bible School, I voiced acceptance of Jesus as my Savior and was baptized shortly thereafter.
Sounds familiar.
Right? Never mind the fact that my parents were devout Christians and I was raised that way anyway. Right. Who knows?
My story too.
Exactly right. So what will happen is, and I said, and trying to determine how much of that was my choice versus their teaching is unprofitable.
Okay.
Because it's like trying to remove a dye from the river after you've dyed it some other color. It's like,
sure.
Right? It's just too intertwined now.
Yeah.
And so So
it's missing the point almost.
Exactly right. And so I said, I will tell you that how much of that was my choice or how much of it was my parents' teaching, that's unprofitable. I will tell you that that same faith was tested later on in life, and that's when I had to keep on regularly deciding, no, this is mine. This isn't just what I was brought up with, because when it gets tested over time through various different things that are going to really crash up against it, it's not a choice you made once. It's a choice you made many times throughout your life, possibly a couple of times throughout the day. But these are choices that you're constantly going along and constantly happening, and so you're constantly orienting yourself to make that choice in a sense as the choice comes up.
So in the conversation about fideism, then, let me see if I'm hearing you correct. Mm-hmm. You almost start from a perspective of fideism, and especially at your youngest extents of faith, mm-hmm. where it is, I know there's something here. I don't know quite all the details, and I don't know what's going on. But over time, you develop into, okay, here's what XYZ was saying about this, and here's why they were saying it. And some things do remain divine mysteries that we can never completely rationalize as humans, but you get a faith that becomes more rational at times.
Well, yeah, but you have to also give it's a fideism?
Fideis.
You have to give it its due, because once a person is raised in a thing, and that's what they've known, it does take more to break them out of it than it does to grow them in it.
Sure.
And so that's why cross-religious conversions are just really rare. Mm-hmm. Usually the normative manner in which any religion expands through births. The conversions are the exception. Throughout, that's why that's true of Christianity, it's true of Judaism, true of Islam, true of Buddhism. The normative way in which any of these religions really expand is through families that have those cultural assumptions, that have all those things that they do on their own time, and the children are just raised in that.
But I would argue that missions is a huge element of most churches.
No, it is. Now, except for Judaism. Judaism really is an expansionistic that way. But still, missions, as much as you're fulfilling, say, within the Christian tradition, you've got this great commission, go into all the world and baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them to do everything I commanded you. There's that missional mandate, but that still is not the mean of kingdom expansion.
Okay.
That is something that is commanded anyway, but that's primarily, you see in, say, the book of Acts, so-and-so and his whole house was baptized.
Sure, yeah.
And so that's why the early Christian church, the early Christian tradition was, yes, send out missionaries, but in reality, baptism takes the place of circumcision. As old Jewish traditions are then kind of Christianized or updated for Christian reality, baptism becomes a replacement for circumcision. That's the way in which we kind of declare you part of the covenant community, and we'll confirm this later on if it's stuck.
Well, and even
that's where the term confirmation actually winds up coming from.
Oh, okay. So even with like circumcision, it became more of a medical necessity, and not necessity, but the medical norm nowadays, especially in the West. And yet, like you said, the baptism kind of replaced the spiritual nature of it, or the spiritual element of it for Christians.
And you're talking about medical necessity. Are you arguing that their circumcision is instituted in the Old Testament out of medical necessity?
I have heard before that was not my argument, but now that I think about it, I have heard before that often many of the things that were instituted in the Old Testament, especially things that involve the body and cleanliness and those kind of things, ultimately had a medical reason behind them that the people didn't know yet.
I'm not arguing that that's never the case.
Sure.
But I think that on a case-by-case basis, you have to kind of look at these things as an individual level, because there are laws of the Old Testament. What is medically necessary for keeping your fabric separate? When you're
baptized,
right?
Yeah.
So there are some laws that will prove to show some medical necessity with regard to camp sanitation and so forth. But there are other laws, as you drill down further and further into them, you realize this is just about making you culturally specific and different from your neighbors.
Sure.
And so there's about just making distinctions between this people and that people, just like you would separate sheep and goats, and you would separate this this animal from that animal. And sometimes something's ritually unclean that has no medical problem with consumption.
Sure.
And so, but it's just considered to be
like pig.
Right, exactly right. Swine. There's nothing medically wrong with eating something ritually unclean in that capacity, but so you really got to drill down in something that's going to be specific at a case-by-case basis.
Sure.
But my research has suggested that circumcision it was never the medical. First of all, it wasn't practiced in the way we do it now, where that cutting takes place all around. It's just that it is a mark that takes place like one cut in one space that just brands you.
Okay.
It's something of a brand.
Okay.
And Jewish men know they are branded for God in whenever they see themselves, whenever they are reproducing, whenever they know that they know are you covenantally and branded for the God who is. And so
I never knew that. I had no idea.
And so as a result, because we might argue medical necessity, but what would we compare that to? Were any other society somehow lacking in reproductive ability?
No.
They were. The Romans weren't behind in their hygiene.
Sure.
And so that's a thing where we go. Some laws may have been medically necessary, but that one was not. It was more about
maybe that wasn't the reason.
It was a physical identifier.
Yeah. You
are in the covenant community, and this is going to make you distinct. Well, later on, Jewish tradition as it grew up, and I don't know if this was always true all throughout the Old Testament, but by the time in the New Testament, Jewish tradition certainly had arisen whereby you may have been circumcised on the 8th day when you could finally produce vitamin K for blood clotting, right?
We just talked about this in class.
So you may have been circumcised on the 8th day, but it won't be really till your bar mitzvah that we confirm that you've really made this your faith.
A Jewish, yeah.
Exactly right. And so really, and therefore you are a free moral agent responsible for yourself under the God of Israel.
Okay.
And so that's your tweens, that's your bar mitzvah, your early teens, tweens in the Jewish tradition. Well, the Christian tradition basically adopts that as, we have confirmation too.
Yeah.
And so all these rituals seem to make sense at the time, and then they wind up, just continue on, because once something begins, everyone just knows that this is what we do. I mean, especially the early Christian community was really a Jewish heresy. Really, right? You know, you're this new weird Jewish sect that's claiming the Messiah is here, right? So, but that's how those traditions continue.
Sure.
Anyway, but I'm hoping that rabbit trail helped. I'm not sure. I'm trying to bring it back to what we started with, because we were talking about nature, nurture, and choice, and how the Calvinistic Arminian debate seems to kind of miss the point. That the reason why both of them have such long-standing traditions associated with them is because you both can cite scriptures that seem to go, it is all about God and it's really about you. And and so it's like, well, which is it? Is it God sovereign over everything, or am I responsible as a moral agent? And the Bible goes, yes, Sparky. Yeah. And so there's that sense in which nature, nurture, and choice, because the scriptures always seem to assume, yes, God is sovereign over all. Choose wisely. Okay. But I would think that that's a great comfort, because otherwise, if you are in some sort of generational curse, and we like to use other terms other than curse, because that sounds like, God's cursed you. But in regular kind of popular parlance, the categories are blessings and cursings, and generational trauma wouldn't be considered a blessing.
No.
And so this idea of generationally something being passed down, if we forget about choice as our responsibility under God, then what hope do we offer someone who has said, okay, this was my family up until now? Do we tell them, okay, statistically, you're screwed?
Sure.
Or do we go, no. Redemption is absolutely available to you in Jesus Christ. It's going to suck, it's going to hurt, but it's there.
Well, and I like how you're approaching it from a middle ground of this is the way that this would naturally go, but there is a different path that we can try to help you take, or even like medical intervention with things such as alcoholism and rehab facilities. Naturally, alcoholism's course is death. It is death by either poisoning, liver failure, whatever it may be. But through resources such as rehab and all these drugs that we have that can either mimic the stimulation, such as like buprenorphine and Suboxone, or that can just completely take it away from you. And I'm forgetting what that one's called off the top of my head, but that takes away the benefit of it from you. It's called antabuse is the common name. Or through paths such as rehab and going to a facility where that is their whole thing. I think it's very interesting that both the medical field of today choose this, let's put you on a different path, at the same time that the faith world has always said that, and has always said we have an alternative for these generational problems. Right. And what's really interesting about the book we were discussing at the beginning, The Body Keeps the Score, there are many different ways in which the body keeps the score, or keeps the record of generational trauma, or even just trauma within your own life. So an example of within your own life is the concept of epigenetics. And so epigenetics, and forgive me, I am a student, so I could get some of this wrong, but epigenetics at its core are these changes, usually in methylation or whatever, at the genetic level, down at your code, that are not inheritable. You cannot give them to your children, and you cannot have received them from your parents. But they help make your genetic code what it is. And so often that's methylation, which is just adding a methyl group to the end of something. But they have these kind of profound impacts in the way proteins code and genes code and all these things. But they're not inheritable. So they are completely unique to you as an individual. Whereas you have inheritable changes or mutations that are absolutely passed along from parent to child. Not in every case. So this idea of mutations are these inheritable things. These things that you can pass from mother to child, or child to their child, and it is this idea of almost a generational curse or blessing, depending on what the mutation is.
Okay.
And so you look at that, and even those aren't always passed down and aren't always inherited. And so there is a kind of genetic basis for this generational trauma or generational blessings. And so that concept of genetics, it doesn't have to be transitioned to the child. There are ways that we have protective factors and such that avoid that transmission.
Okay.
And there's things such as gene therapy that we're looking in with new therapies, especially cancer, where we just completely change that and we target that specifically. And so I just think it's so cool that something that the church has at least always had an idea of, medicine is also catching up and having ways of relating to it.
Right.
And it creates a really cool dialogue, as we're showing here.
Well, one of the things that stimulated this conversation was we talk about the trauma that is generational. We were talking about things that are passed down that you wouldn't necessarily consider a blessing, whether it produces maybe a natural predisposition, or there's a nurture aspect that you kind of go that you would not in any way consider positive. And then, having said that, then in walks the person with the 10 Commandments, Mel Brooks, with these 10 commandments. And one of those specifically is like nestled right in the middle of them is honor your father and mother, that it may go well with you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Just about the other 9 we could possibly do with no problem. Yeah. We could go, okay, I'm reading through the 10 Commandments, and I'm, no other gods. I don't use the name of the Lord in vain. I can remember the Sabbath. I can, I can. It's amazing. I can avoid theft and murder, and those are pretty different. Those are pretty easy not to do. But honor father and mother. Don't.
After all,
those are
yeah.
Really? Do you know my father and mother?
Right.
And it's like in this commandment given to Moses seems to lack those caveats, but it doesn't just do that. It seems to add. It's the only commandment that actually kind of has this fine print of so that it will go well with you in the land the Lord your God is giving you, suggesting some sort of future benefit beyond the horizon that you can't see from here. But trust me, this is a good practice for you long term to figure out how to. Figuring out how to honor your father and mother, and for some that will be easier than others.
Yeah. Well, and
how do we, especially when we're talking about generational trauma, and a person's like, okay, I'm dealing with the fact that I've got this jacked up family, and now you're hitting me with this.
Right, and the entire idea of this conversation was stemming from that, where there are situations where people have alcoholic parents, or they have parents who are emotionally or physically abusive to them, and yet the Bible still says, honor your father and mother so that it may be a benefit to you.
Right.
And so finding that benefit to you is very challenging. Where would you find that benefit in those situations? Or do you have that all figured out?
I do not have it all figured out. And I have to admit to being like complete coward on this business, because I was blessed with parents that are disgustingly normal. Really. My sister and I will talk about this a lot, and we talk about, we were actually around a lot of friends whose family had different challenges, and even some of the things that she and I both experienced as angst of teens and around your peers, even around your religious network for that matter. Still, though, in the midst of all that, you had this weird oasis of great parents, but yet I know that I have to somehow explore this topic, because I do interact with people who go, okay, this is tough. All right, what does that mean to honor someone? Does that mean to obey them? What if they're telling you to? What if you have parents who are telling you to do things you ought not, that you're younger, or you're a teen, or you're still under their authority, and they're telling you things you should not do? Or if you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s, and you're reflecting back on it and going, oh my goodness, somehow by God's grace, I survived you.
Right, they got away with that or something.
Right, exactly, right?
And
so there's something to, I don't know, it seems to be something that has to be customized for each person.
Well, and even in your situation, you have to shepherd people who are coming from those backgrounds.
Right, exactly,
where you yourself don't feel like you have anything.
Yeah, if I only can, assist people who have had my same exact experience, that's very narrow.
Right. No.
So no, I have to think about that, because I have known people who close friends, even close relatives, people I've been close to before, who I've had this conversation where they said, okay, I see that this is something that is supposedly a benefit to me. This is a promise that it's a benefit to me to honor my father and my mother. Let me tell my father. And they share with me the story, and I go, oh, I don't know how you're going to do that.
Yeah, you're sitting there thinking, what?
You're right.
What am I supposed to tell you?
Right. And so what they do is they basically kind of try to drill down and say, you know what? They have this vice, this vice, this vice, this vice. Here's something that I can kind of latch onto as a virtue that I can't claim I came up with on my own. Some guy says, my dad was this, whatever, but you know what? I think I got my work ethic from him.
There you go.
Or someone says my mother was XYZ, and they list 9 different vices, but they find that one virtue and say, I just, she was intensely loyal to her friends. I don't think I ever saw her really backstab anybody. I think I get that from them. So they figure out a thing. I don't know what they do.
They feel comfortable honoring them over, even if the rest of it they can't.
And I wonder, and you would be able to talk about this better than I would, but I wonder to what extent that small searching for the thing to honor, even in the midst of a bunch, it's like when you're trying to sift through a lot of stuff, finding that one little nugget, itself, there's a healing in that process alone.
Well, so in the book, there's an entire section on adverse childhood experiences. I think they call them ACEs.
Okay.
And how they affect populations that are considered, normal, who may not have any psycho illnesses or anything like that. Right. And in populations that are unique, especially personality disorders and patients in inpatient psychiatric clinics. And so the problem with ACEs is that they intensely affect or predispose a child to psychological illness. Again, I wish I had the book with me so I could quote specifics, but issues such as depression, bipolar personality disorders go up, 5, 6, 7-fold when you have adverse childhood experience of, my parents hit me, or my parents, I watched my mom, be abused by my dad, or my dad came home as an alcoholic all the time, or my mom was hooked on opiates, or whatever it is. These ACEs really do detrimental impacts on the child, even if they are immediately removed from those situations by someone like CPS or anything and put into a good situation right after that. They're still one ACE is enough to increase your threshold for illness by 5, 6, 7-fold. And so a lot of these patients, they talked about patients that have PTSD and how this almost sounds like a kind of duh moment. Oh, you have an adverse childhood experience, so you have PTSD. Duh, there's that connection. Right. But all the time, people go through adverse experiences and don't develop post-traumatic stress because of those experiences. And so there's some kind of mismatch there. And
I've often wondered if PTSD is somehow proportional to how much you expected something to be otherwise.
Well, what's really unique about that,
like a child, a child gets hit by a random adult versus a child gets hit by a trusted parent.
Sure.
The expectation wasn't that the adult was going to be that nurturing to you, but the expectation of your parent very much.
So there's a really unique pathway, and it involves, I think it's the dopamine circuit. It's one of the catecholamine circuits where they did these tests on monkeys. Monkeys are considered our best analog as we can in research medicine. And so they would ring a bell. It was like Pavlov's dog. You'd ring a bell, you'd give them the juice, and they'd associate the bell with the juice. Okay. Well, what happened when you rang the bell and you didn't give them the juice was they have this natural like dopamine set, and it would go down.
Right.
And so the entire aspect of this, we had an entire lecture on this in school, where you have a set expectation of, I get the juice when the bell rings, and that doesn't happen, or something bad happens instead,
right.
like you get shocked, just like the kid who's expecting to have their parent
right.
be the one that protects them. There is a wiring in our brain that is not accidental that we have that. It is hardwired into the brain that response happens. Yeah.
Well, I think we do that. I think we reinforce that all the time with various different nonverbal cues that we get from social relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You ever think about what is the chemical utility of asking someone, "How's it going?" when you know their response is just going to be fine?
Yeah.
Well, you somewhat know the response is just going to be fine, and so you go, "How's it going?" Fine. But those type of nonverbal cues are, "How's it going?" and the person doesn't respond to you. Now you violated expectation,
yeah,
and so now I have to investigate.
We have to go down this trail.
Exactly right. And in marriage, it's the same thing, where you do all sorts of small talk, meaningless trivia about the house, the day, the weather, these are all nonverbal cues that we're constantly bouncing off one another as a means of just kind of feeling the room. And that's how you know where that person is at any given moment, because at 10 a.m. you asked, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just doing X, Y, Z. At 6 p.m., what are you doing? Why are you asking?
Uh-oh.
Okay.
What happened?
We have a violation of an expectation now. Must investigate.
And it gets even more challenging when, say, you try to internalize something and not deal with it, where you're just like, what are you doing? Oh, just nothing. Like, there's that cue there that's, there's something up, even though they're not lashing out or something.
Right.
You have to understand your partner to that extent too.
Right. So reason why I wanted to ask about this is because one of the themes I'm going on, and we don't have all day to talk about this, otherwise we'll just keep going on rabbit trails one after the other. But one of the reasons why I bring this up is because I've been on this consistent theme of regarding the difficulties of the Christian life.
Okay.
It just seems like there's a blessed hardness to it, where somewhere along the line...
How stoic of you.
Gosh. Somewhere along the line, well, because you try to do some meta-analysis of why Christianity is a flash in the pan in North America. We really are, of cultures that claim to be predominantly Christian, we've entered a post-Christian era faster than any other culture that made that claim.
Sure.
And so what has made Christianity kind of a flash in the pan in North America, as opposed to, say, other cultures that took much longer to achieve the same place. And so therefore, when you try to do that meta-analysis, it lends itself over to speculation. You try to base it on data, but there's too much to process just in your brain. But one of the things I wonder about is, did we somewhere along the line sell people a bill of goods that somehow life would be made easier this way?
Sure.
In reality, you go, no. It's actually, the life of the Christian is a call to things that are pretty difficult.
Yeah. And
difficult to the point where I quite frankly, I got to tell you, I don't know how you're going to pull off X, Y, Z, because it's I've got other difficulties myself that I'm struggling with. You might not have to struggle with the things that I deal with, and I don't have to struggle with you dealing with. But it is a life of struggle. It's somewhere along the line where Jesus says, if anyone wants to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me.
Or even the rich man. It's easier for the rich man to get
I know, right?
And
so you're just these are follow these under truths that I don't like. I may not like it, but I think it might be true.
Yeah.
That we're just called to the more difficult thing, and I wonder if, specifically as we're talking about mental health, trauma, all these things, we're really trying to call people to the difficult thing that's particularly difficult related to this, because there's somehow that phrase, because it will go well with you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. that in some sort of supra-rational manner is suggesting healing in the pursuit of it.
And how there's reasons why when it can help to, talk to a trusted friend about, they're just so bad, but ultimately healing comes when, okay, maybe they were, but regardless, here is this.
When you go on some sort of relational, emotional, archaeological excavation to try to find that one good thing about the person whose home you're raised in that really sucks,
or even
maybe there's a healing in just the search for that small thing, that one thing to honor.
Or even just coming to terms with, they did this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But here I am today.
Yeah.
And I would not be the person I am because of those things, if not for those things. And whether or not those things were good things, we're still here.
I've met people who were adopted children, they're very happy with the parents that adopted them. They talk about how blessed they were in the family that adopted them. And they're like, I had to be adopted. I was taken from, a bad situation where there was, drugs involved in law enforcement and so forth. And they look back and all they can find is, I exist because of that person.
Yeah. That's
all they're able to find. And they're like, I'm trying to find it. It's like, they're a serial killer. Well, at least he was committed. I mean, they're just like that's the praise you're going to find. I mean, yes, he was a thief and a terrorist, but he had a tremendous singing voice. What are you trying to find? And some people, when they drill down, they're like, all I can honor about this person is the fact that I exist. Well, that's all I can find. But the searching of that somehow galvanized their mind into the realities of God's healing over things like this.
Well, and even in a few situations in my own life, I have found that the horrible thing that happens turns into a way that I'm able to relate to someone and to show them, hey, you're not alone. I've experienced something similar to you. And just how healing that experience is. Mm-hmm. It can create a false glue between those two people if you're not careful.
Right.
But it can also open a door to someone who you wouldn't have had that in otherwise. Yeah. And I think it's remarkably special, even if it hurts.
Right. And it is special. And I think that's part of that redemptive journey that we can offer people that actually is not a short-term placebo that, your faith is about feeling good. No, you might feel worse as you dive, headlong into the generational traumas that you have. But the pursuit of actually of going, okay, I'm going to figure out a way to thank God that I'm here, even by means of them.
Sure.
I wonder. Maybe that's how we help people a little bit more. I don't know.
Well, and maybe there's even that's where that "so that it may bless you" comes in.
You're going to be in the medical field, and you're going to be telling people all the time, "You will not like this, but it's for your health."
Yeah. Well, yeah. Or we're going to do our best to help.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. I really enjoyed our conversations, and I enjoy all the conversations we have when we get together at the brewery.
Always.
So, thank you.
Father Ott, can you just talk a little bit about what was the purpose behind this conversation and this style of conversation? Why would we record this?
The purpose behind this conversation is I think that it is good for just people of faith to talk about real things that don't fit within the walls of your church or the walls of your theology that might have a nice set box around it. I think there's just inherent goodness in that. You're a Christian. I'm not coming at this from some sort of evangelistic perspective. Right. I'm going to convert Joe Rogan.
You could put something in the censors to help with that.
Was that?
You could put something in the censors to help with that.
Gosh, it actually drives me up the nuts because I don't like it when people use seeming conversation as a pretense to it's like an Amway salesman, right? Just come over, have dinner, and let me pull out the whiteboard.
My fiance and I are going on our honeymoon,
right.
and we got a room upgrade. But you know why we got the room upgrade? Because we have to go to a 90-minute sales pitch on here's why you should join our vacation club.
Right. Okay.
So those will be the worst 90 minutes of our honeymoon.
Right,
but we got the room upgrade. So it's okay.
and it really is banking on the guilt of people who are going, "Oh, you provide all this thing, I gotta listen." But no, I don't like that. I think that that's operating in bad faith, and so I don't, and I have no idea what benefit conversations like this might be to you. I have no idea what that is. I know for me, it is illuminating. Helps me better kind of process through the fact that God operates in our world. I think that I use the phrase a lot where sometimes people can be so heavenly minded they're no earthly good.
There you go.
And so I think that you must be able to operate in the world as is, not just as you'd like it to be.
There's scripture that says, be in the world, but not of it.
The world, right,
it does not say, do not be in the world.
Right.
It does not say, be heavenly
merely
beings
on the
immediately,
world.
Right? It says still to be in the world and not of it.
Right.
So.
And this comes, a lot of this comes from when I've spent all my time as a chaplain for fire departments too, where
you've had hard conversations.
I've had a lot of hard conversations, and you just gotta. I mean, when I'm sitting around the table and one guy goes, "Hey, chap, what's going on?" And we start talking, and the guy next to me, so here gets right up in my face, says, "Just want you to know, I think all religion is bullshit."
Oh, great!
And I go, "Great, that's a great opener."
You said I couldn't have done it any better.
Thank you so much for your honesty,
and
for just getting us started like that. And so we start talking, and you just have to just operate in good faith. I mean, I just have enjoyed some great conversations with people with whom I'm never going to agree. I mean, like I said, I taught Christian-Muslim relations for a while with a Muslim scholar. We had great conversations over things we're just not going to agree. If anything, we were able to finally agree about the incompatibility of the two.
Right, on what we're not going to agree about.
Right, we're finally able to agree on those. Well, because there's a lot of confusion on that, right? People, this group says that group eats children. This group says that group is a bunch of pedophiles.
Great,
And you're like going, well, okay, what do we actually do?
Yeah,
And you know what? Those differences are sufficient enough. But at least we're telling the truth about each other.
Sure.
So I think that's very helpful. And I think that in having these conversations, not only do I benefit, but the secondary benefit, I think the primary benefit is myself. This is very masturbatory. The primary benefit is myself with regard to just having conversations. But I think the secondary benefit is that perhaps it serves as a model for others to have conversations too.
Of their own. Sure.
Because ultimately, people who go to a church, they go there to be, I always describe every church as a fire station. You're refreshed, you're renewed, you're trained, you belong in camaraderie, but you're set out. Mm-hmm. And there's a sentness to the Christian where you must leave the village and go out into the world. And then I want to be able to model and equip how to have good conversations with people, because many, that's a mystery to some.